Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us. Welcome back to another episode of Socializing Security. It is Brian alone this week, and so I'm going to record an episode that I plan on dropping on May 5th, which would be our normal Tuesday, and tell you all, I hope you had a great May the 4th. Little extra nerdy than maybe what we're used to, and I'm just going to kind of do that because Milu's not here to keep me from being my nerdy self. If you're not familiar with May the 4th is a day that us Star Wars nerds celebrate Star Wars. You see a lot of Star Wars things happening on that day because it kind of alludes to the May the Force. May the 4th. It's cheesy and it's pun intendedness, but I thought I would use that as an excuse to try out something I'd like to do as maybe a little bit of an ongoing series that we use something from popular culture. In this case, I'm going to talk about the original Star Wars movie and use that as a way to draw lessons of cybersecurity, to try and draw analogies that show how security works in the real world, maybe how we in popular media portray cybersecurity, or things that we can just kind of learn from what happens in these movies that maybe we all kind of know. And to be honest, this is something I've kind of come up with. I'm going to I asked for a quick outline of some things, so I'm going to go through that. I know this movie inside and out, so I'm not too worried about being able to share it. Many of you may or may not know the movie as well as I do. And I just think it's a good way for us to, in several different ways. One, to be able to understand, you just have something similar that we can all latch onto and say, oh yeah, I know this story, I know this thing, I know how this thing played out, and use that as a way to connect with people. And then use that to say, how can the average person that isn't in cybersecurity maybe understand cybersecurity better by talking about how these things work? And then for us, as those of us that are technologists, those of us that are in the cybersecurity space or in the compliance space, to be able to look at it and say, how can this help me teach somebody else that is maybe more that average Joe/Jane out there, to make sure that they understand how cybersecurity works. And so we'll see how this goes. This is another one of those where I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants here and trying to put something together that I think is going to be very evergreen and very meaningful to people. So let's go. I've got a series of, I think, 5 or 6 different moments in Star Wars: A New Hope. I guess maybe a little bit about the movie. It came out in 1977. Originally, when it was released, it was just called Star Wars. That was it. It later got added to be called Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. So it wasn't originally intended to be the massive universe that has been built off of that in the previous 50 years now, almost. That is what it is now. So it's really interesting from that perspective that, it's a movie that came out intending to be a one and done type situation, but instead has made a massive amount of money over the years, has made so many careers of the actors and directors that have been a part of it. So as I go through this, I'm going to go kind of in order of the scenes before I really dig into it. Spoiler alerts. If you haven't watched this nearly 50-year-old movie yet, maybe you should. If you're not as familiar with it, watch it before you listen to this episode or watch this episode. I'm going to talk about the movie as if we've all seen it before and that there's no secrets to be held here. So warning from that perspective before I jump in here. But at this stage, I'm going to go kind of through 5 or 6 different scenes that I think are kind of interesting topics that can help us to push cybersecurity narratives to help people understand why cybersecurity is important. So starting with the first one, at the beginning of the movie kind of starts off with Princess Leia being chased by Darth Vader, and the whole concept of what was going on there that we find out through the movie and even through some of the prequels that kind of lead up into the beginning of A New Hope. We find out that Princess Leia has the plans for the Death Star, and Darth Vader's trying to catch her to be able to stop her from exfiltrating this data, essentially. And that's kind of where it comes into, is This is an act of exfiltrating data. As we found out from the movie Rogue One, these were it was not an insider threat. It was, they broke into this facility and stole these plans and through a series of events got them to Princess Leia's hands. And so this is classic data loss prevention and management of sensitive data. This is some of the most sensitive data that the Empire had, which is, this giant space station that they have that they can use to blow up entire worlds. Kind of a big deal. Like, that's not the kind of thing that you want to lose or to get into the wrong hands. And so protecting that data is key. And obviously if you watch Rogue One, there are a whole bunch of failures that lead to that. Places where they could have stopped but didn't stop this exfiltration from happening. It was a classic. Everything had to go right for them, and it did, and they were able to take that information, that data out. So having strong data classification, making sure that your most sensitive data is classified in a way that it can be automatically extra protected. Things like, again, in Rogue One, they had to plug it into an antenna and beam it up into space.
Admiral, receiving transmission from Scarif.
And having a system that would say, hey, I'm not going to beam anything into space that has this classification that is ultra secure is one of those failure points that could have been in place. Being able to properly track the handling of data, in some cases, you want to catalog every time somebody touches that data, every time somebody reads it, every time somebody copies it, does something with it, so that exactly the, if you will, the chain of custody as to who may have had this at some point in time, who may have manipulated this at some point in time, and really the failure to stop it at all these levels, to truly protect that data. Any data that's available, there are ways to get around it. And again, they were able to get around that to get that data into the hands of the people that ultimately are going to destroy the Death Star. And this goes into A New Hope, where you have Princess Leia putting these plans into R2-D2, hiding it in a non-expected place, and that'll come into play here in a little bit, and then taking it off the ship in a manner in which they ignored that escape pod.
There goes another one.
Hold your fire. There's no life forms. It must have short-circuited.
Of course, that's not the case. Like, you've got to inspect everything that's exiting your environment.
The battle station plans are not aboard this ship, and no transmissions were made. An escape pod was jettisoned during the fighting, but no life forms were aboard.
She must have hidden the plans in the escape pod.
And so that's where data loss prevention comes into play, is that as things are transitioning out of our environment, out of our control, we need to be scanning it and seeing if there's sensitive data in there. And ideally looking at those tags, looking at places where we know sensitive data is and seeing if it matches any of that. And not just relying on, hey, let's scan it and see if there's social security numbers or credit card numbers or whatever inside of there. So it really is like that removable media perspective. Data loss doesn't always have to happen across the wire, across the network. Sometimes it happens because somebody downloads it, puts it onto a USB drive and walks out the door, in which case, it's in their pocket. Maybe they've got it hidden somewhere in their clothing, but how many people get searched as they leave the building? Not very many. And so that concept of always checking for data, always knowing where your data is, knowing who has access to it, making sure that it's got minimal access, all those things are super, super critical to make sure that you have in your environment. And, this exfiltration of Death Star plans is a good example of that. Second scene I want to talk about, the droids have gotten onto Tatooine. They've been picked up by the Jawas and essentially been sold to the Skywalker family. So what's going on with that? As they're moving these assets from one place to another, the Skywalkers buy a couple of droids that they don't know where they came from. They may be junk. And that was actually one of the original droids they picked up was junk, like broke down literally as it was walking away from the Jawas. And so being able to understand your supply chain risk, understanding where the materials you bring into your environment have been to make sure that they're clean, they don't have any malware on them.
Well, my little friend, got something jammed in here real good. Were you on a Star Cruiser?
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
What's this?
What is what? He asked you a question. What is that?
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
Oh, he says it's nothing, sir. Merely a malfunction, old data. Pay it no mind.
To make sure they're not assets that someone else is going to be coming looking for that may be stolen, and therefore you may be liable for having in your possession at the time.
You're my only hope.
He says that he is the property of Obi-Wan Kenobi, a resident of these parts, and it's a private message for him. Quite frankly, sir, I don't know what he's talking about. Our last master was Captain Antilles.
Understanding that these things could go rogue and do things unexpected, just like R2-D2 did once they removed the restraining bolt. He was able to just take off and go do his own thing and could have caused a lot of problems. In fact, they were able to, the stormtroopers were able to track them back to the Lars homestead and, kill them, destroy their homestead. And so, there's a lot of steps that go into that just make that a very big risk for somebody taking on those assets, no matter how good they are. In today's world, hey, I got this really cheap television or Alexa device or whatever that might be that is normally pretty expensive, but I got it, it fell off the back of a truck type of thing. Well, who's to say that hasn't been loaded with malware, that as soon as you plug it in and attach it to your network at home, it's not going to go searching for everything and send a bunch of information to the mob or something like that. This is a big concern as I record this right now with the US government and trying to ban all internet routers that people put in their home that come from China. Well, guess what? Most of the routers people buy in the US are not the most expensive US made stuff, which means that there's a lot of routers. And the concern there is the fact that they may be loading all sorts of malware on there. And even though you're buying it legitimately, getting it from, a trusted source like Amazon or TP-Link, those types of places, you don't know what may be loaded on there. And that is a big concern with any internet connected device these days. I've had a couple of like the internet connected plugs so that I can control Christmas lights and stuff like that. And after a while, once I really kind of learned what could potentially be running on there, I was like, nope, I don't need it to be internet connected. That's not important. I went out and bought some, dumb timers where you just simply set the times when it turns on and off. And I said, that's good enough. I don't need it to be any more elaborate than that. So understanding your supply chain, what risks could be in there if you don't have visibility into everything that's been loaded onto there, or you'll hear the phrase software bill of materials or an SBOM. That can be a key thing that enterprises are looking at these days to understand what is on that software, what is on that device that they're purchasing, putting in their environment. Chain of custody comes in here again in the fact that you know where it's been, you know who's touched it. I've done some research, some work around like memory devices that get created in the factory. They tag it a very specific way, and at each stage of the process, as it goes to a middleman, to the actual computer manufacturer that's going to put it all together, to the reseller, to the end user, at each stage you can essentially scan that memory and show, yes, it was truly been everywhere I expect it to be. Is a really interesting concept to know that, hey, that memory stick doesn't have something weird loaded onto it that as soon as you power on the machine, it's going to suck that into the system and essentially compromise it immediately. Is, the types of things that could potentially be happening. And of course, on the other end of things, you want to make sure that anything you have in your possession that has sensitive data, that has something you don't want getting lost out into the environment, is destroyed properly. Is cleaned, is wiped. A lot of hospitals that I've worked with in the past have to deal with this, is that they actually have to, as they buy storage, for their SAN or for their servers, whatever it is, a hard drive, an SSD drive. When they buy that, they usually buy it with support. So if it breaks down and they can get it replaced, but they usually have to pay a little bit extra because they want to be able to destroy it themselves, or to have some sort of clean destruction agreement with that manufacturer, so that they know that data is never going to get lost. Nobody's going to be able to grab the data off of that disk and do something with it. So having proper asset disposal, being able to have proper vendor oversight as to how your data, your equipment is going to be utilized is super important. And again, it goes back down to that sensitive data aspect of things. When you have your personal computer, again, taking this down to average person type stuff, if you have your computer and you just close it and sell it to somebody or throw it in the trash or send it to recycling, whatever you do with that, all that data is still on there. And while you may have had it password protected, that's not really that hard to get around sometimes. It's gotten harder over the years as we talk about encryption by default and stuff like that. But the thing you should do is wipe it. Like do a low-level wipe, essentially write all zeros to the disk so that there's no evidence of it there. Because when you delete something off of your hard drive, even if you went through and said just within Windows, delete all my images and my videos, all that does is delete the reference to it. And so Windows just doesn't know it's there anymore, but that data is still there. Somebody that can pick up that hard drive and read the raw bytes off of it will be able to pull it out and be able to find things on there, which can be useful to you if your computer were to crash and you wanted to get those files off of there. But it's also somebody can pick it up and pull them off of there without you knowing about it too. So proper disposal is super important, even at our personal level. Again, like Milo and I talk about a lot, your decision on how far you want to go with that is important. But if you've ever transferred to a new iPhone or new Android phone, one of the things they say is make sure you do a wipe at the end of this process so that before you hand it off to the next person. So as we look at the scene and try to explain it to other people, the lesson learned here really needs to be about making sure that you know, again, how your data is being transmitted, what devices you're bringing on. All of that can carry risks as you move these devices around, physically speaking. We haven't even had to talk at all about things going across the network at this stage. This is the physical devices being potentially the place where you lose data or potentially introduce risk into your environment. Okay, moving on to the next scene. We've gone through finding Obi-Wan Kenobi, and now we're headed to Mos Eisley to be able to escape the planet and try to get these plans to the rebellion, is the plan here. And so they pull in, and stormtroopers have already taken over Mos Eisley and trying to, looking for these droids that they realize that was probably the exfiltration. They're like, okay, there's this hot pink USB drive that we think stuff is on. Let's scour everywhere on the planet looking for this hot pink USB drive to take R2-D2 down to a hot pink USB drive. And so as they pull into the town, they're getting interrogated by the stormtroopers.
Let me see your identification.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
He can go about his business.
You can go about your business.
Move along.
Move along.
And so Obi-Wan Kenobi uses his Jedi mind trick, fools the weak mind of that stormtrooper and convinces them that they're not a threat. What can we learn from this? A Jedi mind trick is what threat actors use all of the time for social engineering. They convince you of something that isn't true. They convince you that they truly are a Nigerian prince and that they will give you that millions of dollars if you do this one thing for them. They convince you to hand over your password or that authentication code that just got sent to you via text message. Being able to fool you into doing things is, quite frankly, a Jedi mind trick. It is amazing what they're able to do. Just taking advantage, just hacking the human brain without any magic or force needed. So knowing who you are talking to is critical. So and this is a weird paranoid state that I live in that sucks a lot. I've had to deal with my car insurance recently due to an accident. And so I've been getting a lot of calls from numbers I don't recognize, which makes me super uncomfortable. Just generally as an introvert, I don't want to pick up the phone. But I figured out which phone number is the adjuster. I'm picking it up. They're saying things to me, and I'm like, how do I know for sure this is actually my insurance adjuster? Because it's a different person I talked to last time. And it's a big organization, so it's not surprising that I talk to different people at different points in time. And I've been through this before, not my first rodeo, but I'm sitting there constantly thinking, is this the person I think they are? And would they have access to this information in other avenues that they're using to more or less authenticate themselves? They're saying things, okay, well, I hear you had an accident with this particular vehicle. Okay, yeah, that's true. That's something someone else could look up. And then they say this other thing and they say this other thing. And now all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure this person is legit. I will now share information with them. This is the level of paranoia that I feel is important in the world that we live in today, because finding information about you is probably easier than you think. and to be able to prove to you that they say they are. And then you throw deep fakes in there and being able to say, yeah, grandma's calling and asking to send some money because my kid got into jail or something like that is possible. It's happening. And it's scary what people can actually know about you. So essentially just don't always trust everybody based on their word, unless you can get them on video and see them. We recently had an episode where we talked about risk within HR and the fact that maybe we need to make sure that as 5 different people interview who we think is the same person, we actually go back and look and say, yeah, they are the same person in all 5 of those interviews. Things like that to make sure that we know who we're actually talking to. And really, to me, this is kind of a perfect analogy to show how manipulative social engineering can really be. That sometimes it does look like a Jedi mind trick. Like, I know at some point I'll probably screw up. I know you all will probably screw up at some point and give up that information because somebody was just so good at it that there was no way you're going to spot it. It's falling for phishing schemes and things like that. Like, occasionally you are going to fail at that. And that's why our companies are testing us. They're sending us fake phishing messages and cataloging who's actually clicking on the links, who's actually reporting them. And that helps them understand how and where they need to focus on training to try to improve, because it's never going to be perfect. That's the sad part, is it's just never going to be perfect. Okay, moving on to the next scene. This one is a really interesting one to me. It's probably a little bit of a stretch, but bear with me on this one. They've escaped Tatooine on the Millennium Falcon. Millennium Falcon comes out of hyperspace where they think there's a planet. Turns out that there's no longer a planet there, but there is this big giant space station, and they get tractor beamed in. And how do they deal with that? Well, on the Millennium Falcon, they deal with it by hiding themselves and making it look like they had abandoned ship before they ever even got to that space. On the Empire side of things, they kind of give up at that point.
There's no one here.
Boy, it's lucky you had these compartments.
I use them for smuggling. I never thought I'd be smuggling myself in them.
It's essentially a Trojan horse in the end, is what happens here, is that they bring this on and they end up bringing in the very people that are going to rescue the person that they're trying to get the information out of. It's kind of an ironic twist in that they had them in their hands, the very things that they were looking for. So being able to know what you have, again, this gets a little bit into that supply chain side of things, know what you're bringing into your environment and what all pieces and parts are in there. And again, we're not going to be able to inspect every single bit, every single byte of every single block of every single piece of equipment that we bring in. It's just not going to be possible. At some level, there's some trust that you have to place into somebody. If you're going to buy the cheapest router that you can find on the internet, guess what? It probably wasn't made in the US, and it may very likely have malware on it, as opposed to buying it from a trusted source that, maybe it wasn't manufactured in the US, maybe it was manufactured in China, but it was by a big name brand that hopefully has the proper controls in place that you can trust to create that. So the concepts that come into play here are things like intrusion detection. It's things like having a SIM, having proper management of alerts and incident response. It's essentially your SOC, your security operations center type of thing, making sure that they're not overwhelmed with the number of alerts that they're seeing, making sure that they're properly looking at the things that really do. This is a big part of where AI is going to make a huge difference for security teams, is that we can now pull in more information than we were ever able to as humans, digest it quicker, and be able to highlight to the humans the places where they really need to look, reducing the false positives that exist that say, hey, you need to go look at this place because this thing is happening, and being able to get through the noise to the signal faster, to use a whole different analogy. So how do we look at this? We look at this by treating our alert seriously. If the computer pops up a message and says, hey, you've got a virus, hey, there's something wrong, don't just sit on it. Don't ignore it. I'm guilty of this because we're all so busy. And that's part of what they count on. They count on us being busy and not being able to look at these things quickly. If you get that alert, you got to dig into it. Potentially just turn it off the internet and go search on a different device. But also be aware of the fact that, like, one of the things that they have been using to phishing is on a web browser popping up. They infect a site, or you go to a site that they somehow coax you into going into or fooling you to going into. And it pops up this window that looks an awful lot like Windows or Mac and tells you, hey, you've got a virus. Click here to clean it up now. And people click on it. And now they're getting malware instead of cleaning up malware. So again, there's a balance here. You got to understand it. You got to look at things. You got to stop, pause, think about what you're looking at, and then decide how you're going to deal with that. And again, at that point, it may be pull the plug, get it off the network and grab your phone and start searching. Those types of things. Take them seriously. Try to address them as quickly as possible. In a corporate environment, listening to the team that is in charge of those types of things, properly tracking those assets, properly understanding what's coming in, what's going out, what's normal, what's abnormal, and having clear procedures around these things is super important. Okay, moving on to the fifth one, which follows directly out of that fourth one, is like once you've got something inside your defenses, you got to make sure you've got the proper interior defenses as well. Because once Han and Luke and Chewbacca and the droids are let loose inside of the Death Star, it seems like nothing's stopping them. You know, they do steal the armor from the stormtroopers. They probably have the key cards and everything. And this is where multi-factor authentication is going to come in.
Everything's under control. Situation normal.
What happened?
Had a slight weapons malfunction, but everything's perfectly all right now. We're fine. We're all fine here now. Thank you. How are you?
We're sending a squad up.
Negative. We have a reactor leak here now. Give us a few minutes to lock it down. Large leak, very dangerous.
Who is this? What's your operating number?
Boring conversation anyway.
Luke, we're gonna have company!
Like if I'm going to try to get into a room that can control everything inside the facility, I probably want to have not only swipe a card, but some sort of biometrics or some sort of PIN code to go along with it. So a what you have and a what you know, or what you have and a who you are from a biometrics perspective. If you go back, we had a previous episode on authentication that I did, in making sure that, you know, again, verifying who you're letting into a secure area, making sure that you know who they are, making sure they actually have access that they should be allowed in the first place. And on the other end, it's super important to make sure that you protect your own assets so that people can't break in as you. Making sure you don't lose the badge card that gets you into your building with just a single tap. Make sure you don't lose or give up that password. Making sure that you don't just give out that two-factor authentication that showed up on your phone to anybody. Those are super important things to keep to yourself, to keep in your possession, under your control the entire time, so that people can't accidentally get in as you. You may think, well, I've got multi-factor authentication, so if they happen to get my password, no big deal. Well, guess what? The first thing they're going to do is they're going to try to alert fatigue you. They're going to send you a whole bunch of verification codes until you send them the one that they want. And they are able to then get in at that point. Again, making sure that, just because you get into a hallway doesn't mean you should be able to get to any room within the entire place. You have interior walls physically in your building that potentially have to badge through. And also from a network perspective, making sure the microsegmentation, that ability to put firewalls inside of the business so that, I can't walk directly from, if I were to infect your web server out in your DMZ, that I can't just walk straight to your application server, that you put controls in there to stop that. And even if I get to your application server, I can't just log straight into your database server. Those are super critical things to try to put separations in there. Another analogy that may be even more real world to a lot of people is the literal firewall. It's a wall that's designed to stop fire within a physical building so that it can't spread. And those are those doors that say this door must remain closed. It is a fire door, because that door then is also part of that protection to keep the fire from getting through. So what lessons do we learn from here? It's segmentation. It's separating things as much as possible, having to constantly ask people who they are to re-authenticate, to once again prove who they are. Just because they got in the first door, we shouldn't assume that they're able to get into the second door, even if they claim to be the same person. Critical systems like garbage control.
Shut down all the garbage matches on the tension level!
No! Shut them all down! Hurry!
those types of things, you need to make sure that they have proper controls around them. This is where RBAC, or role-based access control, goes into place, and ensuring least privilege, making sure that they can only get to the bare minimum of what they need, and that anything above that they're going to have to ask for or get some sort of special permission, or what we sometimes will call like a break glass type of an account. Essentially, I don't get access to this account without it being logged and people knowing exactly who grabbed that account. So lots of things about how to control the inside in that lesson. Okay, let's finish up with the end of the movie, which is the destruction of the Death Star itself. Who in the world allows an exhaust port to be the main thing a single photon torpedo is going to destroy?
I made myself indispensable, and all the while, I laid the groundwork for my revenge. We call it the Death Star. There is no better name, and the day is coming soon when it will be unleashed. I've placed a weakness deep within the system, a flaw so small and powerful they will never find it.
And so being able to have that one minor vulnerability, no matter how small that vulnerability is, if somebody is able to read the source code or gets some sort of insider knowledge or finds out what the default credentials are for an admin account on a network device, if they can find that tiny little hole, they're going to sneak through it. And you should assume that any tiny hole like that is always going to be eventually found out. Now, there's vulnerabilities of devices that are a decade old. It may have taken them a decade, but that doesn't mean that those devices are no longer in use in production environments. So secure by design, make sure that there isn't a potential for that. Make sure you've got good code review. Make sure you've got good risk understanding of that. Red teaming or purple teaming, those things, having people explicitly do nothing but try to break into these locally or remotely. Some people will implement this. They will literally take the USB ports on a server or a desktop, and they will put super glue in them to essentially destroy that port so nobody can actually plug in a USB key into those devices. That prevents that ability to exfiltrate data through that way. So always looking for those single points of failure, always looking for those places where they could get in, not ignoring the small stuff or the big stuff, and making sure that you understand where they could potentially get in. And kind of like we did with the Risk Summit, really understanding, okay, I've got this risk. I've got this risk of a USB port. What am I going to do with it? Am I going to ignore it and just pretend like it doesn't exist? Am I going to buy insurance to cover whatever losses may happen because of it? Or am I going to do something about it? Am I going to try to mitigate that and make it go away? That applies here in this case. Anytime you find that vulnerability, you got to figure out what you're going to do with it. And you got to be prepared to make that decision if you go looking for those vulnerabilities as well. So this is ultimately a lesson that, normal people can learn about patches and updates. You get that alert on your phone that says, hey, we've got an update. You just need to restart. And you're like, oh, geez, that means all of these things are going to close and I'm going to start all over again. And you wait 3 or 4 days before you do it. Well, it's 3 or 4 days of whatever hole got patched with that release being known in the public. And 3 or 4 days is nothing to an attacker these days if they really want to get into your device. So being very thoughtful about that from an organizational perspective, having a good IT patching methodology, approach, plan for how you deal with these, depending on the CVE number, depending on your own risk assessment of them, and being able to put that risk assessment in there as part of that. So that exhaust port represents that critical design flaw, that critical hole that could be in there. Make sure that you've got secure stuff. Make sure that you understand where things may not be maybe safe there. And it kind of ties back to supply chain risk. Because again, if we go back to Rogue One, we find out that the designer of the Death Star actually put that there on purpose. And so understanding how things are developed. And this is one of those things, it's like the end consumer of this thing is probably not going to ever understand that or be able to find it. There's a lot of trust built into that process, and it got snuck in from the very, very, very ground floor. And so that's where we've got to make sure that we're looking for those things and putting the proper controls around it so that those 0 days, those things that we don't know about until they get taken advantage of, are harder to take advantage of, even if we don't know that they exist. So that's it. That's my rant on Star Wars for May the 4th. Hopefully that helps out some of you. This is one of those episodes, again, I kind of think of as something that those of us that are in cybersecurity can pass off to people to say, hey, here's an episode that hey, you love Star Wars, you don't understand cybersecurity. Here's an episode. Listen to this, and you might learn a thing. I've found success with in my career is being able to take these complex topics and explain them a little bit more simply. Maybe not to my grandma who, never had a cell phone, never really knew how to deal with technology per se. But for those of us that do need to understand it, to be able to explain those things and help others to understand these complex topics in ways that are a little bit easier to understand. And I think going through movies that a lot of us may understand or already know can help out with that. So I hope this was useful. I hope you share it around. Like, subscribe, all those types of things for more of these. Hopefully want to do more of these. Please do absolutely let me know what you think about this. If you find this helpful, if you have suggestions for other movies to do, I've got a list, but I'm not going to claim that it's everything, and would definitely prefer to do ones that you all would like to hear me go on about. So drop those to us, info@socializingsecurity.com. Would love to hear from you all about that. But for now, we'll call that good. Welcome to May. And I hope it's a good one for you all, graduations and everything that'll be going on. And we'll talk to you again next week. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.